Evening, everybody, from beautiful city of Kampala in Uganda. Tonight we're talking about the concept of orgtology. The word orgtology is a combination between the words organization and the Greek word logi. Logi meaning science or logic. In other words, literally translated, the word orgtology means the science of organization. Now, although this concept was coined in 2018, this comes quite a long way. Most of my adult life, I've been working with organizations, trying to understand what an organization is, what makes some organizations phenomenal, and why others go extinct. So the very first thing to understand here is, what is an organization? What makes an organization different to a system? If we go to Mother Nature, you'll see that there's quite an efficient system going on there. You know, the honeybees pollinate the flowers grow from ground, the dung beetle carries the decaying matter of other animals deep underground, the antelope eats the flowers, the lion eats the antelope, and the lion dies, and, you know, it itself becomes ground. So is this an organization? No, it's not, because that's a system. There's no abstract thinking in a system. There's no possibility in a system to create intent. If you're a hawk, you can fly and you can decide to catch a mouse or rabbit, but the hawk cannot decide to become a vegetarian. It's locked into its purpose. Humans, on the other hand, have this amazing ability to create intent beyond purpose. So an organization has a human element in it. If there's no humans in an organization, you can't call it that. So organization in literal sense is really a combination, a collaboration between systems intelligence and human intellect. That's what an organization is. Now, I've been working with these entities called organizations for the last few decades. I've probably touched base with about 200 organizations in 27 different countries. Mostly these projects entailed the training of executive teams, process engineering, strategy development, organizational design, and so forth. So this has been a passion of mine, and I've learned that to understand organizations, we have to understand two things. We have to understand the dynamics within an organization. That's the human minds that make up this organization. The unpredictability and irrationality that goes with dynamics is the first thing that one tries to grasp when you try to understand an organization, because it's from these human minds that organization was born. But there's also the system side of this. We need to understand the algorithms of organizations. An algorithm is basically a set of rules that has a sequence of activity that produces a very specific and predictable output. So if you understand the systems and you understand the dynamics, you understand the entire organization. Everything fits into one of these two things. So to do that, in Orgtology, we've created two arms of study. The first arm is called orgamatics. The word orgamatics means organization combined with the mathematical side of organizations. That would be the algorithmic side, the predictable side, but not in the way that it cannot be creative, but it's quantifiable. Then we also look at the other side of organizations, the dynamic side, and there we call the study organamics. The word organamics meaning organization and dynamics, a blend between the two words. So in the one, we study the systems and the systemic side of organizations, and in the other part, we decide the more unpredictable dynamic side of an organization. If you look at the chart in front of you, you'll see that it's a brief outline of the hypothesis that begins Orgtology and the theories that come from this hypothesis. It's not my intent to give you a detailed description. I'll be making separate video clips to explain each one of them. So as you can see there, Orgtology begins in hypothesis 2x of inverse duality. I will make a specific video clip where I explain hypothesis 2x, and I'll make another video clip to explain what inverse duality is, since both of these things need quite an intensive explanation. Now, hypothesis 2x basically, in a nutshell, tells us that the 2 stands for duality. So there's always some type of duality that makes a third concept in an organization. If you take organization itself, it's made through receptive and projective elements. There's always something projecting and something receiving this projection. If these two things draw from the same resource pool, they become inverse. For instance, we have strategy and operations. Strategy is very disruptive, it's projective, its intent is to better or change the organizations, to bring about the operations, to bring about a new status quo, where operations is receptive and it produces the performance of the organization, where strategy gives the relevance of the organization. Now, they both use the same people, money, and assets. Therefore, they draw from the same resource pool, which makes them inverse. A bit more about that in another video. The X stands for an X factor. That's the human factor, the unpredictable, irrational factor. What we basically have found, what I have found in my research, is that if you take two organizations that has exactly the same resources, exactly the same strategy, exactly the same operational ability and plans, they will produce different results. Because the humans inside these organizations are not predictable, are dynamic. If you give two actors the same script, exactly the same script, you tell them to prepare in the same way, they will give you two separate renditions on the script. So from this hypothesis, we go into orgamatics, the systemic side of organizations, and there you'll see there's 4 theories. And these theories are all there to explain the duality. We have theory 2I of Orgtologist. The word Orgtellligence means organizational intelligence. Organizational intelligence is a combination between human intellect and systems intelligence. The one is implied and the other one is tacit. Then we have theory 2P of work. We're saying that work is either brought about by repetitive activity or non-repetitive activity. There's no other way to do it. We call repetitive activities processes, and we call non-repetitive activities projects. Then there's theory 2E of results. Results is either brought about through efficiency or effectiveness. I'll give an explanation of all these dualities in their own separate video clips. Then we have theory O of the RPO. RPO stands for the relevant and performing organization. And collectively, these theories bring about a study of workplace systems. Then we have the bottom part, organamics. Organamics studies theory 2I of intelligence, theory PX of paradigm, theory SX of identity, and then there's theory D of the relevant and performing individual. Now, the aim of organamics theories is to understand the X factor. So we understand the duality through orgamatics, and we understand the dynamics through organamics. Organamics is there to bring about a study of workplace dynamics. To call something a science or to make something scientific, you have to have a unit of measure. We can't call something a science if we can't measure it. So the first dilemma that Orgtology faces is, how are we going to measure whatever it is that we want to understand in the organization? And the resolve that we have for this is to create a unit of measure which we call activity. Activity is always bound by time and space. When there is an activity, it happens within the boundaries of time and space. The opportunity of activity is that the data that it collects and the data that you can add to an activity is infinite. Activities have time, they have place, they have resources, there's people, there's money, there's assets, they have opportunities, they have risks. It's infinite. There's no limit to the amount of data that you can capture within an activity. But this still stays a meaningless exercise because, just having a bucket with data inside it means nothing. It's like the word house. House consists of a number of letters that create the word house. But what does house mean? If I say this is my house or that is the house of my neighbor, the word house gets its meaning through its dependency sequence. So the position within other words tell us what house means. It's the same with activity. Activity means absolutely nothing on its own. It starts getting meaning when you put it in sequence with other activities. So when you create something repetitive or non-repetitive projects and processes, that's when an activity becomes something meaningful. Now, the real thing that gives the activity the meaning is the output. So what happens when you place activity in sequence, there's something that happens because of that. We call that something an output. The way that the environment responds to that output, that's called an outcome. And outcomes create relationships. So activity begins to mean something if it has a sequence that produces an output, and if these outputs creates a relationship with an environment. For instance, if you build a car, that's an output. Whether people like the car or buy the car or enjoy the car, that's an outcome. All of this creates something called consciousness. So yes, we do believe in Orgtology that an organization has its own consciousness created through the movement and the relationships of activity. To understand the dynamics and the systems of organizations, we have to find a way to cluster them. Now, we cluster them in basic systems that we assume are the systems that any organization has to have. Of course, there's your core business system. Every organization decides what it does. And that's not something we can say much about. I think, that's the uniqueness of any organization, is the decision of what does it do as its core task. But we can look at the things around that. And we basically have three types of systems in organizations, three systems that any organization should have. Every organization must have relationships. Without relationships, they don't exist. Organizations only exist through relationships. So there needs to be a relationship system. And in this relationship system, we would cluster things like customer relations, stakeholder relations, labor relations. That would be a system. A system, the difference between something in a system and something in an organogram is that an organogram is mostly driven by practicality. The system is driven by purpose. So we don't cluster things according to where the people are or what the departments look like. We would cluster it according to what is the purpose of a group of processes. So first there's the relationship system. Then we have a resource system. Resources would be people, money, and assets. So things that would fit into a resource system would be stuff like recruitment and selection, procurement, budgeting. And a third system then would be intelligence, Orgtologist, organizational intelligence. How do we create the loops in the organization? How do we learn? These would be things like risk, understanding risk. These would be things like transformation, strategy development, project management, research and development. So all those things you cluster within an Orgtelligence system. Then we do the same with dynamics to understand the unpredictable and irrational nature of the human mind. We clustered, and the effect that this has on the organization, the dynamic that this causes in the organization. We look at three types of dynamics. First, there's your intrapersonal dynamics. That would be your ability to manage stress, your ability to deal with internal conflict, your ability to your idea of yourself. That would be intrapersonal dynamics. And then we have team dynamics. That's more your interpersonal things. How do you work in the team? How do you get along with others? How able are you to produce collective outputs? And so forth. That would be your team dynamics. And then the third one is leadership dynamics. How able are you to influence, to change things? How able are you to convince people to follow your route? How able are you to negotiate a favorable position for something? In the diagram on your screen there, you can see it shows how the hypothesis 2x of Orgtology defines the four orgamatics theories and the four organamics theories. Now, on your left side, we have the orgamatics theories. They create three systems: resource system, Orgtelligence, and relationship system, as I've explained just a few seconds ago. Now, we don't mention the core business system there, since in Orgtology, we don't try to tell people how to do their core business. We work with how to enable this core business through resources, Orgtelligence, and relationships. This then enables the relevant and performing organization, or the RPO. On the right side, you can see there's the four organamics theories, the theories that works with the dynamics of an organization. They create three dynamics: leadership, team, and intrapersonal dynamics. And this then in turn creates the relevant and performing individual. So the last thing that I would like to talk about in this clip is what Orgtology is not. Now, it certainly is not a new name for old stuff. It's not just rearranging business theories into new fancy names. Orgtology really makes a big difference. If you start understanding hypothesis 2x, the consequence of that, and if you start understanding the theories of orgamatics and the theories of organamics, it really makes quite a big difference. A simple example, if you take something like mission and vision, if I ask people in business schools what is the difference between a mission and a vision, the common understanding and explanation of that would be that a vision is where we want to go and a mission is how we get there. Now, in Orgtology, that really is a oversimplistic and almost nonsensical statement. We would rather say we don't talk about mission and vision. We would rather talk about statement of purpose and statement of intent. Who are you? What is your purpose? Why do you exist? Organizations begin in purpose. Purpose would be who are you, and intent would be what would you like to do with that? If we take leadership, for instance, the normal idea sold with many motivational speakers and books on this topic is that leadership is a good thing and management is not such a good thing. Well, in Orgtology, we have a very different view of that. We would see leadership as the projective elements, the things that create the change, and these often should be the smallest part of the organization, where management would be the receptive things, the operational side of things, the process side of things. And then you start seeing that these things are, it's not like moving from one to the other. It's rather having a duality that creates a whole. If you start looking at it in that way, then things become more scientific and more meaningful.